Hello again. We are Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 16 looking at the question, is Tennessee a legitimate SEC title contender? Some of that is going to be how good is the Vols roster. Some of that is going to be, do the Vols have a schedule that is favorable to get them there? We'll be examining both those parts. But first, Chase, who sponsors this content?
That's right. That is Bet Online, and they are the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. It's football season, and they've got you covered everything from preseason NFL to college football kicking off. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on a winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. And when the game's over, you can go to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker or one of the over 150 slots games. Head over to the website today and use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, and get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here.
All right, let's start with the roster. Let's start at quarterback. And I think everybody knows the story of Nico Iamaleava. I think the talent is there. Everybody believes that. We saw a glimpse of it in the bowl game against Iowa. So I would say, and this is being presumptive, right? The kid's had one career start. But if we trust the people out there who've seen him, I think Nico's got the talent to maybe get the Vols pretty far. Are we in agreement there?
Yes, I think so. I 100% agree.
All right, let's move on to some other spots. And again, that's a question, but we're just going to presume that for this. I think Dylan Sampson, their running back, is one of the more underrated players in the league. Squirrel White in the slot is one of the league's better slot receivers. They've got other talent around them. They've got Bru McCoy, Donte Thornton. They brought in Chris Brazzell II from Tulane. And oh, by the way, Mike Matthews, five-star freshman, Chaz Nimrod, he's still around. They improved at tight end with Holden Staes from Notre Dame. I think the targets and the guys to hand off to feels like Tennessee's got enough there. It may not be the superstars that everybody else has got, but I really like their depth. And again, I think Sampson could lead the league in rushing by the time it's done.
I really like Dylan Sampson, and we've talked about him here on this channel a lot. I feel like he's one of those backs. You said it. He's a little flying under the radar, but I feel like by midway through the season, he could be a guy who's up towards the top of rushing in the SEC. Really like him. And then you mentioned the targets as well. Bru McCoy, who has battled some injury. Squirrel White, who I think is a great receiver. Chris Brazzell, Donte Thornton, Caleb Webb. Those are guys who are going to get a lot of touches, I feel like. And then you mentioned Mike Matthews. Like, where does he fit into this? Is his high school numbers going to transfer in? I'm sure he'll get some targets there at receiver. So yeah, their skill guys I think are on par with like what we saw in 22, maybe a little better. Nico Iamaleava is, like we said, he's a guy that can get them places. That's what kind of quarterback he is. Extremely talented, and to have the pieces he has around him, because he's a dual threat guy. He can throw, he can run. And so to add other guys around him who also can do big things, like a Squirrel White, like a Bru McCoy, like a Dylan Sampson, I feel like the offense is in really good shape. Right. And again, we haven't seen them play a game yet. But I feel like from the outside looking in, this offense is in really good shape.
All right, next question, or next area I'm going to look at is offensive line. I look for a couple things. I look for star power and continuity. Star power. They've got Cooper Mays at center, who's been there forever. Preseason All-American candidate. They got Lance Hurd at left tackle. Now, he's going to be new. He's not started before, but we know the reason. He was playing behind 2 first-rounders at LSU. He was a top 25 recruit out of high school. You would presume he will man left tackle pretty well. You look at right tackle. John Campbell started 9 times a year ago. You look at depth. They've got guys like Andre Carrique, Jackson Lampley, splitting time at that left guard position. Both of them made starts a year ago. They've got Reddick over at right guard, who I think played 11 games for them a year ago. They got Dayne Davis backing up Campbell at right tackle. He made 3 starts a year ago. I feel like that's a pretty good combination of talent and experience. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention Javontez Spraggins at right guard, who's also getting some preseason All SEC love. So if you're scoring at home here, you got two potential preseason All SEC candidates in Hurd and Spraggins, and then you've got a preseason All-American in Mays, plus a lot of guys that played a lot of snaps. I feel like their offensive line has been a strength for them since Josh Heupel has been the head coach, and it feels on paper they're headed that way again.
It really does. I feel like that's one of his main focuses. You know, he's an offensive guy. He was a quarterback at Oklahoma. He understands the importance of offensive line, and he recruits that way. And it's obvious this year, I feel like, with the offensive line that they have to go along with the rest of the weapons that are on the offense. They've been waiting for Iamaleava to take over at quarterback. And so Heupel knew he has to have a good offensive line to kind of lead the way for Iamaleava to do what he knows he can do, to open up some room for Dylan Sampson, to provide time for Nico to get the ball out of his hands to a guy like Squirrel White or Bru McCoy. And so I feel like the offense is shaping up to be really good. And yes, they have all the star power, but this offensive line, I feel like, is going to be the reason that Tennessee puts the points up that they do. We know it starts in the trenches, but I really like these guys they have on the offensive line.
Well, speaking of the trenches, we haven't even gotten to the guy that is presumably Tennessee's best player. That's James Pearce Jr., who's manning one edge on the defensive side. Potential number one overall pick in next year's NFL draft. They have a couple of guys inside, and Omari Thomas and Omar Norman-Lott, who played a lot of ball, who are getting some love as preseason all SEC guys. Now, the secondary is where I've got some questions, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it helps a whole lot when you got guys that are cutting down the windows in terms of time and angles that a guy's got to throw. And so I think that's going to help Tennessee where they are probably relatively weaker.
Yes, and you're right. There's a lot of questions in the secondary, but they've made up for it on the defensive front. And, you know, will that benefit the secondary of having such a strong defensive line? Probably so. And I think we'll see that this year. But they do have some dudes up front, and I think that's going to be very good for Tennessee this year. Even with and again, the guys in the secondary, the more ball they play, the better they'll get. We know that. So, you know, by mid-season, it's going to look much different than it does at the beginning of the season. But yeah, I really like the defensive front. That is definitely a strong point for this Tennessee team this year.
Okay, the back seven is, I think, where we've got more of the questions. And I'm not saying they're bad here. I'm just saying,
yeah,
they are questionable relative to the other SEC teams. Now, where they get a boost, Keenan Pili is back. He got hurt the first game a year ago. I think he's 26 or 27 years old, maybe older than that. I think that's about right, though. Class of 2016. They get him back, manning the middle linebacker spot. That was a luxury they didn't have a year ago. They've got some other good players there, but just guys that have not been frontline guys. Arian Carter, one guy at the star position, Jordan Thomas, played a lot, not been a starter. They reloaded at corner. They got Bru McCoy from Oregon State, Jalen McMurray at Temple. We'll see how those guys do on a bigger stage. They lost a lot in the defensive backfield. They brought in Jacoby Thomas from Middle Tennessee State, who had a really stellar campaign there a year ago. Again, I'm not saying they're bad in the secondary. I'm just saying when you look at the rest of the roster, which is loaded with all-star candidates and most of those other areas, this is where they're not so much stacked with top-end talent, All-Americans, preseason All-SEC guys. Again, you do have, though, that defensive line that could probably mitigate a lot of those questions.
Yeah, certainly will. And I think defensive line is going to be the name of the game for Tennessee this year, especially with that anchor of James Pearce Jr. But I feel like the secondary is just going to come along and get better as the year goes by. But yeah, that defensive front is a big exclamation point for this Tennessee team this year.
All right, let's talk schedule. And I'm not saying Tennessee's schedule is easy. Don't hear me. Don't get it wrong, okay? Tennessee has got some tough games on here. North Carolina State. Tennessee has got a road trip to Oklahoma. It's got to play Florida, which is always tricky. It's got to play Alabama, but both those are home. It's got a road trip to Georgia. But I started looking, I've got a way that I kind of measure the schedules through an index of some computer rankings. There's about 5 of them. I won't bore you with the details, but just the numbers, strength of schedule overall for all the FBS games. Tennessee ranked in strength of schedule 15 of 16 teams. Only Missouri had a weaker schedule by this measure. Now, we can argue, does Tennessee have a tougher schedule than Texas or Auburn or some teams right in front of them? It's all really close, okay? I'm just telling you the number the computer spit out. Tennessee is going to be favored by roughly 170 points in its games. It's going to be favored roughly 8 of 11 times in its games against FBS teams. Add in another time where it'll be favored against Chattanooga in the opener FCS team. So I think the schedule, starting out favored 9 times, and big favorites in a lot of these. Although I think the question, the problem is this schedule is kind of unbalanced. There's a lot of pretty easy games in there. For example, I'll give you these. Tennessee is going to be roughly, a 42-point favorite against Kent State. It's going to be a double-digit favorite probably to Arkansas, though not by a lot. Probably be a double-digit favorite around 10.5 against Kentucky. Probably around 19-point favorite against Mississippi State right now. And then favorites in a big way, UTEP be probably a 37-point favorite, and at Vandy, probably 21.5 is the number I'm looking at compared to this model I've built. Now, the problem is you built up your strength of schedule with some easier games, but then you've got to play 3 really, really tough ones at Oklahoma, Alabama at home, and at Georgia. Tennessee will probably be a slight underdog by about a field goal at Oklahoma, probably about a 4.5-point underdog to Alabama at home as I'm looking at this today, and then probably a 17-point underdog at Georgia. So the schedule, though it suggests on the whole it's easier once you start digging into it a little bit, because frankly, I'd rather play 2 mediocre teams than a title contender and a bad one and have the numbers balance it out. So I think those are all angles of the Tennessee schedule. I still think their schedule stacks up favorably. But I think you got to get to 10-2. And is there a path here? I think there is, Chase. I think Oklahoma's going to be a slight favorite in Norman early. That'll be a big game. I think Tennessee's capable of beating Alabama at home. We saw what happened last time. Now, at Georgia, good luck to you. But I think you kind of get a pass on that one. And if you're Tennessee, if you can take care of just one of 2 at Oklahoma or Alabama, that's assuming you get by NC State in week 2. I think Tennessee is squarely in there at 10-2. Then that's going to be who else did what, right? But that gets you in contention for the title. I guess the issue is if we're talking SEC title, you really got to probably win 2 of those 3. That might be where it gets tough, but it's doable.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like there's so much that hangs on this Oklahoma game for Tennessee. If they win that one, I feel like you're in good shape at that point. Yes, you have Alabama. Yes, you have Georgia and a handful of other SEC games that obviously it's the SEC. Anything can happen. But I feel like you get Oklahoma, you're feeling much better. Then if you get Alabama, you're feeling really good. And you'll have Georgia later in November. But I feel like a lot hangs on that Oklahoma game. If you drop that game, I feel like your SEC title contentions go way down at that point. So you get Oklahoma, I feel like Tennessee is in a really good spot because I think a lot of crazy things are going to happen in SEC football this year that could change the outcome of the course of what happens. So it's going to be hard for any team to go unbeaten. We've said that because the schedules are just are way tougher now with taking away the East and the West. And so, but for Tennessee, for them to get to the SEC title game, I think it starts with winning this game at Oklahoma, and you're in a much better position if that happens.
Yeah, I think I'm going to presume if they go to Oklahoma and win, they will beat NC State and Charlotte. I think at that point, if they go to Oklahoma and get that one, and I think that is a fascinating matchup. To me, at that point, I don't know. That may be their key game. It's hard to say because we don't know how the tiebreaker is going to come down. But I feel like if Tennessee can get that one, they're on the short list of teams that we'll see in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think it very well could be. Again, a lot hangs on that game, and it could be a fun year for the Vols, no doubt.
Now, tell me, am I crazy here? I like Tennessee's chances of beating Alabama and Knoxville, even though the numbers say they're going to be a bigger underdog than I do them winning in Norman. I just think we saw how last time Knoxville just went bananas for that game.
Yeah.
Alabama couldn't hear itself think. Tennessee kicked that knuckleball field goal at the end to win it. And, it just all pandemonium broke loose. I feel like, especially if they get Oklahoma in that early game, that is going to be a bananas atmosphere. And I think, I don't know. I think Alabama, to me, is a little down by Alabama standards. And I think that one's very gettable based on what we've seen. I think the Oklahoma game is key, because if you win that one and you beat Alabama, then really, the Georgia game is a little bit of a mulligan in terms of the playoff and maybe the SEC title too.
I agree with you there. I mean, Knoxville's a tough place to play, and Alabama struggled there last time, and those fans remember that, and they remember beating or having that lead in the first half against Alabama last year, and the Tide charging back and winning that game in Tuscaloosa. And so, Tennessee will be fired up for this Alabama game. There's no doubt about it. So, I would agree with that statement.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a fun year to watch the Vols. It all starts August 31st at 11:45 Central against Chattanooga. And then the next week, it gets real with that game against NC State in Charlotte. We'll be here to cover all of it. We cover SEC football, baseball, and basketball year-round, wall-to-wall. Best way to see our content, hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or your podcast platform, and hit the like button. It helps our analytics. And if you're interested in advertising, we reach millions of people a year. Caroline.smith@southeastern14.com is where you direct your advertising inquiries. For Chase Robinson, I'm Chris Lee. You are watching Southeastern 16, presented by BetOnline.